Hi, Jamie.
How you doing?
Oh, I need to change my background. Nobody look. Adjust background. Which one? I choose this one.
You always choose that one.
I'm a person of habit.
That's the truth. You want to talk about, I feel like because people are listening, I feel like we should start with the word Anacortes.
Okay, well, first of all, because people have not yet heard the interview, they're going to go, huh? So, Anacortes.
That's why I'm starting with it.
Oh, good. Do you know it? I don't know its derivation or its genesis.
No, I don't, but I'm like...
But I've been there because my kids used to go to camp on the San Juan Islands, which is just below Canada. Orcas Island and San Juan Island. Lopez Island is up there. Anyway, so my kids used to go to camp up there. And so there's a ferry that leaves from Anacortes. And so then all of a sudden, our guest today, Justin Irish, is the superintendent in Anacortes. And so what a treat. This doesn't have to do with Justin Irish, but I want to talk to you about an argument I got with my 16-year-old.
Oh, please.
So when we were children, we didn't have cell phones. So there was no locator on our phones that our parents could track us to follow us.
Right.
And we do that, although we only do it we're really disciplined. Like, I don't do it just to see where they are. I do it in case there's an emergency and I needed to know where they were.
Uh-huh.
And I do that because they're a little bit more private about who their friends are than when I was a kid. My parents knew all my friends and that was it. So they knew if I went missing, they just needed to call one of 3 other people to see where am I. So that's like a triangle. And so it was like they knew who my friends were, or I told them where I was going. And nowadays, if those 2 are absent, you could at least see where they are by their phone.
Right.
My 16-year-old, he botched the login or something, so it won't do it. And truly, he botched it. It's not that he's playing a game. And then he really is so private about who his friends are, so I don't even know who they are. And, we're new to this area, so
right.
I don't know who these people are. And then the third is he doesn't want to tell us where he's going. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know. I'll text you. So we got into this big fight where I was like, I need to know one of the 3 vertices. I just need to know one point of this triangle.
And how did you respond to that?
Oh, horribly. Yeah. I got the silent treatment this morning. And he texted only his mother yesterday where he was going because I get to be the bad guy.
Fascinating. Can I make a connection? Is that all right?
Please. With our interview?
No.
Oh, I'm like
the interview.
I was like, wow.
That could possibly make a connection to our guest, Justin Irish, where he talks about basically listening to your constituents, right? Doing a better job listening. And there's once again, the thread of listening comes up and it's both happily surprised and not surprised at the same time, but that I wonder where I missed as a father in this case in listening to my son. Like, what is he experiencing that's causing him to behave in this way, or what's different for him than was different for me?
I like it. I'm assigning my experiences and not understanding why he can't comply. And I actually have the quote. I have the quote from Justin, which is, he says, and then we're going to go into the conversation. So I really want people to listen for this and hear how he says it. But he says, first step is listening and learning. I mean, I think I've definitely made a lot of mistakes. And I would say that those mistakes always stem from not listening or engaging the right people or slowing them down in co-designing. And Jamie Almanzan, you've done it again. You've done it again.
It's the same.
Right.
I need the same for us.
Co-design with him. Just first of all, this is not. Oh man. Okay. Well, I can't wait to see him later today. I'm sure he's going to be thrilled that I'm going to say, my friend Jamie helped me through this.
Can I ask you some questions?
I've got the Post-it note. Why didn't you? Damn it. That's not the Post-it note.
Can I ask you some questions?
All right, let's go into our conversation with Justin Irish. You are listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. And don't forget, if you learned something today or you just want to say to others, hey, this is a podcast worth listening to, please give us 5 stars or leave us a comment. Or as Jamie has mentioned in the past, you can say
anything.
I don't want to tell you who I've been talking to or who my friends are or where I'm going to be. That's not your business.
Your
5
business.
stars.
5 stars. 5 stars.
Here we go. Imperfect leaders. Are you facing challenges filling open speech-language pathologist positions within your district? Kind of a silly question because I know you are. MPAT Speech understands the critical need for qualified professionals in your schools. They recognize that communication lies at the heart of academic success, and that's why they're dedicated to helping you bridge the gap by offering expert therapists and innovative telehealth solutions. Don't let open positions hinder your students' success. Partner with Empath Speech today and ensure every child in your district has access to the speech therapy they deserve. Empath Speech, EMPAT speech.com. Empowering students, empowering schools. Today on An Imperfect Leader, our guest is Dr. Justin Irish, Superintendent of the Anacortes School District in Anacortes, Washington. Justin, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you. Good to be here today.
Well, I'm so thrilled to have you, and it's so nice to meet you. I really do. I enjoy learning about the leaders that I get the privilege to meet. And sometimes it's from articles that they've written, and sometimes it's from interviews that they've given. So I did that. I was like, Googling you and learning a little bit more about you. And I listened to an interview that you gave about career connections. And then when I went to your website, which I'm really impressed, your goals are like front and center. And, one of your goals, goal 2.1 for those keeping score, is to build strategic partnerships. Now, partnerships can have multiple meanings, right? So they can be the different ways that you've approached that term. And so, actually, that's kind of my question, because it could be, leveraging relationships for career pathways. It could be meeting the mental health needs of children, which, has never been more important than today. So I wonder, could you talk a little bit about the different ways that you've approached that term partnerships for yourself and your community?
Absolutely. So we have a strategic plan with 4 pillars, and one of those pillars is partnership. And when you think about a small school district, partnerships matter for all school districts, whether you're large or small. And what's unique about small school districts is we have very few resources when it comes to depth within the organization or layers within the organization. And we rely heavily on our partners in our local community to help us reach our goals. And I think the biggest area that we have seen since COVID is our need around mental health, social services, supporting our students in transitional housing. And we know that, the state does its best to give us the funding we need, but they're far from meeting that goal. And so in order for us to really strengthen our access to kids, we've had to create those partnerships. I think one thing we're so proud of is that we have mental health counselors in every school, providing not just tier 1 or tier 2 needs, but we also have partnerships with our hospital and literally across the street from our district office, where we have psychologists, psychiatrists working with our kids who need tier 3 services and intervention, as well as working with that family unit. It's a really unique program that we have here. And it could only happen because of the foundations, the Island Health Foundation, our Anacortes Schools Foundation, a little bit of grant money from Skagit County. And when we think about combining those resources together, we've been able to create some unique programs and access for kids.
That's fantastic. It makes me think of a similar partnership through our county in Missouri that the residents of the community chose to tax themselves for a children's services fund. And this was to support essentially mental health supports and things like that. And so as you were describing the partnerships you have with the local hospital, with local psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health providers, we did what was essentially like a mental health questionnaire, a survey, a screener type of thing to, we always know who needs help for those externalizers, right? You have to clear a classroom, those types of things. A child makes it known they're in crisis. And then there are the quiet internalizers that we sometimes miss. And so I'm kind of curious how you and your team, as you're building these partnerships and meeting the needs of children, how you've kind of worked on that. It sounds like, based on your head nodding, that's something that you've not forgotten.
Yeah. One of the things that I value in leadership in general, what I spend a lot of time trying to unpack and grow in as a leader is systemic thinking and building systems of predictable support. And one of those areas that we know is that, it's a statewide initiative to think about the multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS model. And that's not just for academics. So we have intentionally designed tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 services. And through that work, we've been able to identify which students need those services, when and how. And so for tier 1, we've implemented social emotional learning and curriculum across all of our schools. So every kid, no matter their background, no matter who they are, they're getting access to the same instruction around social emotional health. And then we know that not all kids are successful with that instruction and need additional supports. And so we've got, staff on site who provide levels of support, whether it's counselors or our social workers or our mental health therapists who our community has graciously funded. And then through those surveys, through Panorama and other resources, we're able to identify kids for those tier 2 interventions or the students, the few who need tier 3. And that's where the Island Health has been really powerful, is to have that kind of, we have monthly meetings with their medical team, making sure our kids are getting individualized care and the family unit is getting the support that they need.
I love it. I read that I think it's more than 40% of superintendents in Washington State where you are in their first or second year, I think. And that is not, that's an astounding number or percentage. And then it's kind of the story across the nation. And so as your colleagues are inheriting districts that may not have had these systems in place, what might be some advice that you would offer as a leader who's leading this work? Like the first step, because you can't take it all.
First step is listening and learning. I think I have definitely made a lot of mistakes, and I would say that those mistakes always stem from not listening or engaging the right people or down. Right.
Yeah. Or there's a habit of systems thinking that is associated with the avoiding the impulse to make a quick decision. You're like, oh, I got this.
The system says, or research says, so let's just build it.
Right. People do that. Yeah. My favorite one was when I told people that, class size really doesn't matter. Ooh, yeah. That didn't go so well for me.
Right.
It doesn't.
The biggest lesson I've learned through my own failures as well as through my successes is co-design. You have to co-design with people. You have to have iterative cycles of co-design in order to build momentum, buy-in, shared meaning and understanding. And I'm a firm believer that a strategic plan is just a strategic plan on paper if you don't actually co-design it with people. And it has to be a living and breathing process that will evolve based on the feedback that you're receiving and actively searching.
Yeah, no, I love what you're saying, because when I think about this idea you called shared meaning, and I like to refer to it as like this shared image, right? A shared image of what success looks like. And your first piece of advice, I think, is totally the way that any one of us, and sometimes we forget, is to listen, to see where do we have common ground and where can we find that shared image of what we want for children. And often that is asking this sort of overarching question of what do we want to create together? And that really opens up some pretty interesting and just, I think, marvelous conversations.
Yeah.
If you're just joining us on An Imperfect Leader, my guest today is Justin Irish, Superintendent of the Anacortes School District. Now, in the leadership model that I use, there are 3 dimensions. There's collective aspiration, there's nested patterns, there's the leaders learning work. And inside the dimension leaders learning work, that's where systems thinking and design thinking live. And I came across your superintendent and board decision-making process. Again, this is brilliant. It's some of the biggest issues for superintendents, especially new ones, are like when it comes to roles or responsibilities. And so would you tell us how you use this process to make decisions? And I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Sure. This particular document has been an evolution over time since I was a principal. And then I used it in my role as an assistant superintendent and now superintendent. And it's only been refined over the years. And I think the challenge we face as leaders is that when we're making decisions, the best decisions are those that are shared. Those are the ones that are co-designed with people, but you can't always co-design everything. Otherwise you would just be in standstill. And so I think it's important when you're pulling a group of people together who are investing their time and energy and passion in a decision that they know up front what level of decision or what influence they have in that decision. I know personally, I hate being asked at the table to provide feedback and then my feedback isn't used. Or I think I get to be a part of the decision, but in fact, I'm not a part of the decision. And then maybe I wouldn't have even come to the table. And so I think it's critical that when we are making decisions, when we're planning strategy, when we're moving improvement efforts forward, that you think about who is at the table. It's also important to think about who's not at the table, who isn't represented. And then when you bring people to the table, you're really clear, like, this is a decision that I'm making, but I value your input and your input will inform my decision. Or I'm not making the decision. This is a collective decision. And through shared consensus, we're going to make this together. Or in those rare situations where you say, this is an emergency, I'm making this decision without input. And that should be very few times, right? So that's what this shared decision-making process is, just making really clear about what my goals are and what my hopes are, not just for me, but for every leader in our organization.
Yeah. And what I thought was really interesting about it was that there are some there's a part on the document that really makes it clear what the superintendent is not responsible for, that the board sometimes actually has to make decisions that you get to provide input, but don't make the decision. And sometimes in a community, the title superintendent conveys this image of sort of this, omnipowerful, figurehead who gets to decide everything. And it's like, actually, there are parts. And one part of that is like the budget. The superintendent makes a recommendation. The board typically is the one who approves the budget. In certain states, like New York, the whole community votes on the budget. Every year they vote on it. In Connecticut, the superintendent and the board resolve around, they come together on a budget and then they submit it to the city. And the city then decides how much of the budget they approve. And then they send it back to the board for its continued work. So I kind of prefer the 7-member board who takes input from the community and the administration and makes that decision. And most of the time they rely on the superintendent to provide that budget, but they're the ones who ultimately. So I was hoping, just kind of thinking through this process that you use, because all across the nation, districts are now trying to navigate budget shortfalls. They're working on building reserves. They're maybe planning for uncertain and ever-changing times. And so I wonder, how would this process work for you as you're thinking about budget planning?
Yeah. Well, 3 years ago, we, like many districts in the state, realized that we are on a cliff and that sooner than later, we're going to use up all of our fund balance reserves. So 3 years ago, we began a process where I had iterative cycles of feedback. I really believe in those iterative loops where you have multiple groups giving you feedback and you don't necessarily pull everybody together at the same time. And then you're transparent about what feedback you're getting from those groups, right? So our first approach, and actually context matters. So I just hired a new finance director. And so he was learning our budget at the same time. So he and I are relatively new to the district. And so we decided, let's build a zero balance approach. Let's zero out everything in our budget. Let's start from scratch and let's educate our community and our staff about what each of those budget items, what they fund. And so we then went through a filter process of building back the budget based on what is required by law or contract. And we added all that money back into line items. And then we had another filter of what is essential. So it's not necessarily required. It's not by law, but we feel that these items are essential in order for us to manage. So for example, the state doesn't fully fund recess supervisors, but we know we need the recess supervisors on the playground. It's not law. It's not contract. But if we don't have them on the playground, kids are going to get hurt. So that's essential. We're going to make sure that we have adequate staffing on the playground. And then the third is discretionary. What is it that we really want, but might not be able to afford? And so we built back that budget. We basically told the community and staff, these are the things that we have to do by law and contract. And then let's look at and unpack what is essential and what is discretionary. And that first year, what we really identified at that time, we had a $45 million budget. We had to cut $3 million out of that $45 million budget. By the time that we looked at what was required by law and contract, 40 million of that $45 million budget was already taken up. So now we have a narrow scope. We have $5 million.
Right. And then I've listened to you talk about pathways for students. So whether it's like, shipbuilding or aeronautics or culinary, or those are that third tier of like, this is why kids come to school. They're not coming for okay. So you've got 3 million to cut and basically 5 million is, what you're cutting from.
Right. And the other filter that we had as a group and was the vision that was guided by our school board, which I really appreciate, is that we are going to cut farthest from the classroom first. And that we're here in the business of educating children. And so let's protect the classroom. And so that was another filter that we used when we determined what was discretionary and what was essential. And so, we had some hard discussions, but what it did is it really allowed the community to understand that none of these decisions are good, but we really don't have a lot of wiggle room and there really isn't a lot of choice when it comes to it. And so that was the first year. And our second year, since we rebuilt the budget based on those parameters, we started the plus minus approach of, okay, what is it that we have to add based on new contract language with bargaining? What new laws or unfunded mandates are required at the state level? We build all of those additions into the budget. And then we identify what our target amount is that we have to reduce. And we start identifying through a budget advisory council again, what is it that we need to reduce? Thinking through what's discretionary and essential. And that was year 2 of our budget advisory council. And now year 3, we have cut so much farthest from the classroom, and we have impacted classroom. I don't want to disregard that, but we have cut so much that at this point, I can't even go out to the community and talk about it because we're talking about individual people's jobs and their contracts. So to go out into the budget process and make it public, you can't do it. So what's beautiful is that for the last 2 years, our community's been engaged. So that the banter on Facebook now is somebody makes a comment that is negative about us not being transparent. Somebody from the Budget Advisory Council will link something on our website or will start to say, no, this is what the process that we used. And they're countering that narrative.
I love it. It's not you and it's not defensive. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Here's a link to transparency or how we're making decisions. Yeah. Here's the process we use to make decisions. And there are times where they can't talk about it because it talks about personnel. Yeah. Oh, that's pretty marvelous. 2 things came to mind. One is when we were doing zero-based budgeting, it really was a shift in our culture. And because leaders would feel as if they didn't spend everything down, they weren't going to get the funds again the next year. And we would say, tell us exactly what you need. Yeah. And we will endeavor to give you what you need. As opposed to, it looks like last year, a week before we freeze any more additional spending because we're pretty much at the end of the year, you, over the last 5 years, make this major purchase of like paper and things that you're encumbering funds for next year in this fiscal year. And quite frankly, you can't do that. And so it really did shift to trying to create this level of trust of saying, what do you need? And then we'll try to provide it as best as we can. The other thing it made me think about was a leader who actually was on this program once who used this term karma points. You can cut things that are cuttable. You also have to associate the emotional impact of that cut. It may seem small, and yet it will have a ripple effect throughout your small community because everyone cared about that crossing guard. There's a reason why everyone feels that they belong because that person's welcoming everyone every morning. Yet it may not have been the most essential job, yet it becomes essential to the mission that you're trying to do. So,
and one of my measures for success is, and by no means have I reached it every time, is that people can come forward and say, I don't like the decision, but I was a part of the process and I understand why the decision was made. And we've had multiple situations like that. And it personal, when we're talking about people's personal livelihoods, I mean, look, these people have dedicated years of service to our kids and our community, and suddenly they don't have a job and they don't have a livelihood.
Right. And you're the new guy in town, and our family's been here. We have deep roots. We founded this community.
Yeah. Can never lose sight of the human side of this, ever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is about human-centered leadership. And so I'm going to ask you the question that I ask every guest who comes on the program. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
Yeah. An imperfect leader to me, I mean, there's nobody is perfect. There's no such thing as the most effective leader. There isn't. We all make mistakes. And I believe in vulnerability. Maybe sometimes I'm too vulnerable, but I want to create an environment where, I think it was Keegan that said, we spend so much of I'm butchering it, but basically we spend so much of our capital trying to cover up our weaknesses that we waste time. And so what if we all actually exposed our weaknesses so that everybody on our team could help fill in where those weaknesses are? I have weaknesses. I have strengths too, and I can't be everything. And so how do I collectively bring people together to say, Justin's strength is not this, but my strength is. And so I'm going to make sure that I'm at the table during these conversations, right? And so what I really try to do is make sure that we are allowed to make mistakes. We're allowed to own our weakness. We're not judged for it, but we're judged for how we manage it.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being. And I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest today is Dr. Justin Irish, Superintendent of the Anacortes School District in Anacortes, Washington. Now, in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made, and then we discuss it. So, Justin, what happened?
Well, when you ask me this question, it's, of course, there's multiple opportunities to go back in time and redo something, right? And I was waffling between two different ideas. One was around, in my role as an assistant superintendent in a large urban school district, dismantling the after school childcare program and rebuilding it. And I think most recently it's in 2020 when I became a superintendent during the pandemic here in Anacortes, inheriting a momentum around rethinking and redesigning our highly capable program. So,
yeah. All right. So you think which one?
Let's focus on the highly capable, since that was in my role as a superintendent. Yeah.
I'm so glad you chose that. I have many sort of my own thoughts about it as well. And so I'd be curious to see where it goes. And then if you see me sort of go off camera and I'm in the corner in a fetal position, there's a reason, but we'll get to that. So here we go.
Well, great. Well, I guess I'll start with, context matters. I was hired as a superintendent in February of 2020. I didn't really even understand it. There was a worldwide pandemic. Kind of knew something about COVID was happening. And then suddenly the world shuts down and I then roll into this position thinking, okay, it's just going to be a few months, right?
Oh my gosh. And really the Seattle and Western Washington was really that, and New York were sort of the ground zero for this. So we were in the Midwest sort of watching going, well, that looked bad. And so, yeah, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So you were taking over right at that time?
Right at that time. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my, Justin. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it was an emotional roller coaster. And I didn't know anybody. I didn't know the community. I didn't know staff. My first meetings with staff were all online, and when I do see them, we're wearing masks. So they were people that I did not even recognize a year later when they took their masks off. Right. So it was a traumatic experience as a leader navigating that. But in any case, I come in, and my first job, of course, is just crisis management. Like, how do we navigate closing schools? How do we navigate online learning? How do we create a schedule? How do I partner with our unions? How do I partner with the community? How am I communicating? And during this time, I was meeting occasionally with staff, and I had a couple staff and leaders who came forward and talked about this move that they had been studying over the years, moving to a blended model with HiCap and really rethinking and redesigning how we deliver HiCap instruction especially for our secondary students. And so,
and HiCap is highly capable.
Yeah. Highly capable.
Okay. Yeah. It's called different things in different parts of the country. So just for those who are listening.
Yeah. Or advanced placement courses, right? Or AP courses, and rethinking through do AP for all, right? Or a blended model instead of having the move was moving away from having singleton classes where cohorts of students who are gifted and talented are in the class together and not interacting with other age level peers. They are on their own track. And so the movement that I was told is that the district had been looking to blend some of those classes and courses so that students were in more heterogeneous settings. And so,
and yet if they wanted to sort of contract for an honors type of thing, they could still take an AP course, and then their peers maybe studying similar themes, maybe different books, but having enriching conversations together.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Okay.
And so this is what I was told. And the other context to know is the assistant superintendent who ended up leaving at the same time I came. So and we're a small district, so all institutional knowledge was gone. Right. So all I have is a few conversations. So no institutional knowledge. I hire a new assistant superintendent, and we are trying to figure this out together. And so I made the mistake of listening to a few key community members and staff and saying, well, yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like you've been working on this for a while. It's okay. We're going to move forward with this. And that first year of COVID, things were fine. Like everyone were doing remote learning. Nobody even really noticed. It was just like everybody was in chaos. People were trying to just meet their basic needs. But the second year, when we actually came back to in-person learning, even though we were 6 feet apart, wearing masks, all this, suddenly everyone's starting to see, well, there's a different model here. And when who made that decision? And did the new superintendent just made this happen without telling anyone? And then suddenly, and I'm hearing from my board saying, Justin, what's happening? The board wasn't even aware of it. And so I suddenly I met with the board, we talked about it, and first thing I did is we have to pause. We're pausing. Like, I don't even understand the problem we're trying to solve. The community doesn't understand. The staff don't understand. And no one's on the same page here. So we are pausing all decisions at this point forward, and we're going to engage people. And so
however, school has started, right? I mean, so schedules have been created. Teachers are teaching, so I'm curious
about
what
few courses that have moved to this model.
Yeah.
So we had to, so we were moving forward with the classes that were already in the model. We put a pause on any other future classes moving to this model. And so my assistant superintendent and I together, like, strategized, and we ended up, to give her a lot of credit, she is an amazing leader. We constructed multiple community group, focus group committees to focus on all of these hot topic issues, whether it be another hot topic issue was NGSS standard implementation. The other was high cap. So we had all this a blended model. So we brought together community and staff with really clear charters in place of what the role of the committee was, what the decision-making process was going to look like, what the outcomes were going to be. And we rolled up our sleeves and tried to figure it out. At the same time, what I realized is that in our strategic plan that I inherited, there were not a lot of really clear measurable outcomes. There was really clear vision, really clear mission, and really clear big picture actions to take, but not a lot of key performance indicators or key performance outcomes to really measure our progress. So at the same time as this was happening, I was engaging the board and a superintendent advisory council of community members to rethink through, not changing the strategic plan much, but really honing it to think about what are our key outcomes that we can measure along the way. And that also helped us get really clear about what we were doing and why we were doing it and what equity meant. So throughout this whole conversation of dismantling high cap, the narrative got spread out about social justice, and inaccuracies were being shared about what it means to be an equity leader. And so we had to really define as a group, what does equity mean for our school district? What does that mean for highly capable? And so through these multiple iterative processes, we were able to actually come to a consensus around what it meant. And then ultimately I had to make a decision on where to go. There were many community members who were unhappy with the decision, but they were okay because they were a part of the process and didn't like the decision, but felt like we compromised. Right. And so a lot came from that. But it was, I remember a second year, we're in masks, sitting 6 feet apart in our auditorium at a board meeting. And the bright lights were shining on us because we had to be in this large auditorium, couldn't see the people in the audience. And all I have is, angry comment after comment about inaccuracies around what equity means. Right. What is equity? And we're doing this in the name of social justice, and equity and equality are being confused by community members. And,
yes. Do you know, I even had a strategist on the show a couple of weeks ago, and their episode will launch in a few weeks. And they said there's even a confusion around equity, thinking about people's home values, about equity.
Yes.
And then, oh my gosh. Okay. So equity, equality, and then the sort of financial equity.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
And yet it all gets blended up into this, soup that makes no sense to people as you're really talking about. No, we're talking about because kids, what we want for children and getting what children need. Let me go to the protocols here. This is, as my mentor would say, a juicy topic, and one that I think lots of people are wrestling with, particularly around giving children what they need, trying to figure out the best way to think about staffing. And so you've got, brilliant teachers who sometimes have only, a very small class of highly capable kids. And we want to leverage their strength to teach all kids because, academic, ability doesn't necessarily translate about a child who's hardworking and has ideas and wants to learn. And so, how do you create these heterogeneous classes while still meeting the needs of children and also being mindful of trying not to overwhelm teachers, trying to meet the needs of so many different children and their needs. So, okay, this is a lot. But
you summed that up beautifully.
No, I pulling out my hair only because this really is something that I think leaders all across the nation are trying to figure out. Yeah. How do you dismantle tracking and also recognize that a child who aspires for a certain career or has real interest, we don't want to extinguish that. We want to, amplify that. And we want to also try to light the fires for so many children. That's the essence of public schools. So what it sounds like one of the things that got overlooked was going to your community elders to some extent. I think you refer to them as key players or key thought leaders, as opposed to really harvesting the wisdom of the community as a whole. That's one piece that got overlooked. Would you say anything more to that?
Well, I think that the bigger issue is, what are we trying to solve? And nobody could answer that question. I mean, everybody, I'm going to rephrase that. People could answer the question, but the answers were different. And so, so you can't move or change. You shouldn't address change if people don't even understand what the problem is to begin with, and without doing a needs analysis first. And there was no needs analysis. It was just, and
so maybe what kind of overlooked is you inherited this plan and you started executing.
Right. But the plan I learned wasn't even socialized. It wasn't socialized with the board or with anyone else. And so I don't even know.
That's right. You said the board said, hey man, what's going on? What are we doing?
Yeah. And so I don't want to, I'm not trying to throw the other superintendent under the bus. Maybe this wasn't a plan. Right. Well, it was my mistake. I didn't
take away that you were,
and listen. Right. And so what I should have done is said, okay, this is what I'm hearing. There was a key group of people who are interested in pursuing this model. Let's pause. I appreciate your passion. Let's try to understand what the problem is that we're trying to solve. Let's look at the data. Let's look at, everything from lagging to leading data. Let's engage our community. Let's engage our staff, and let's try to understand what is it that we're currently doing that aligns with best practice. What does the research say? What are the gaps between what we're doing and what best practice says? What is the data telling us? And then let's build a shared understanding and a common action plan with people to fill those gaps. That would have been the right strategy. And that's what we ended up doing. But
I'm going to get to that. I'm going to say, what was something that's good that came out of it in one moment? Before that, I want to ask you a question that I think really speaks to leadership, human-centered leadership. What did you learn about relationships, or what new relationships were formed?
Oh gosh, understanding the context of where you serve is so important. Understanding the key players, understanding the needs of the community. If you are a servant leader, you serve, and you can't serve unless you know the needs and understand the context of who you're serving. And so that was my big lesson, is I just can't move from what was happening in another school district and transfer it to this school district. We are a completely different entity. We're a completely different community with different needs. And it's important to build trust and relationships with people so that they can move with you. And not to say that everyone will always move with you, but the majority should. And you're not going to please everybody. We know that. So that's been the biggest lesson. And I think through many of these hard discussions and conflicts, I've built some really lasting relationships and advisors in the community who are blunt and frank. We can be blunt and frank with each other. Like I said earlier, we can share our vulnerabilities with each other. I have members of this community that I can show all my cards, be completely vulnerable with, and say, I don't have the answer. Help me. Or I made a mistake.
That speaks a lot to the relationships you built in such a short time, because sometimes the response is, that's not my job. That's why they pay you to be the superintendent. And you say, and so your takeaway there is, sometimes it's frustration. At the same time, it's also, you have to do your own self-reflection. I haven't built enough of a relationship with this individual that they want to step into this arena with me. They just want to throw things from the audience. And so it really does speak to, whether you realize it or not, how quickly you have built some enduring relationships with people based on your willingness to be vulnerable. I think you said early on, sometimes I worry I'm being too vulnerable. I think it's such a powerful approach to leadership. I really do.
Well, I think one of the things that I'm, another added to this complexity is, I think really the issue here is, as a nation, we're very divided when it comes to understanding what equity means, understanding what DEI means in this moment, understanding what inclusivity means, understanding all of that. And one thing that when I brought together all of these key community leaders into an advisory council, we were able to move away from this idea of what's happening in Montana, what's happening in Florida, what's happening in Connecticut. Let's stop listening to what the news is telling us what all these things mean. And let's really focus locally. What does equity mean for the students in the Anacortes School District? What does that mean for us? And what does gender identity mean in the Anacortes School District? And through our work and through those conversations, again, people might not agree with it, but now we have a common definition, and we're not relying on what Fox News or CNN is saying. We're actually defining it for us. And that's where you've got those, lack of a better word, the army of people who are able to go out into the community and say, no, I may not agree with it, but this is what it means in Anacortes. And so, and when I would have people come to me, whether it was controversies around masks or controversies around racial justice or George Floyd or police or whatever it might be, we were able to say, what does that mean for us locally? And what's happening in Anacortes? Oh, no, what you're talking about is happening in Florida. Man, I'm not going to talk about that. What's happening here? What's happening here?
I think you're really bringing up something so smart, which is when you ask people, tell me about the state of education in America, they go, like from an A to F, D. You say, okay, what about in the state of Washington? Like maybe C or D. What about Anacortes? A. People love their schools. They love their communities and they love their teachers and they believe so fervently about the good things that are happening for their community. And so if you can make that sort of correction for everyone to say, we're going to talk about what do we believe? What are our beliefs, principles, and values of Anacortes? And, and how can I help lead that work together? Right.
Yep.
Then I think that's really smart. I think it's great advice for a new leader. Okay. So then this is sort of my last question, which is, so what was something that was good that came out of that? Clearly is something just so powerful. What else?
I think we have a shared vision. I mean, it's clear right now when controversy happens on Facebook and the keyboard warriors who are, spreading all these rumors on Facebook, what we have now is a group of people who are at the table, who are able to say firsthand, this is what's happening. And not only say what's happening, but point people to the resources that are provided by our district to help people understand and to shape the narrative. I believe we've gotten ahead of the narrative. We are an underfunded, under-resourced, overburdened school system. Every school system is. We don't have the time and the energy to be battling false narratives out there and to be dealing with the soup du jour of whatever's happening at the federal level. We have to stay focused and grounded in who we are as a community. And so if we can get ahead of the narrative, if we can engage our people, that's why this shared decision-making process was created in the first place, is for us to be really clear about who is at the table and so that they can be our best advocates, even if they disagree with our decision.
Our guest today was Dr. Justin Irish, Superintendent of the Anacortes School District in Anacortes, Washington. And Justin, as I wrote little notes as you were talking, some of my takeaways, obviously the value and the importance of having a shared image or shared meaning, as you referred to it, the value of engaging in iterations because it allows a community, particularly leaders and the community as a whole, to make mid-course corrections if things aren't moving in the direction as you had sort of cast on where you want to be. The fact that your strategic plan and your own goals, if one were to go to your website, you can see the metrics that you have said. Here's what we have claimed to be the most important thing to pay attention to as we try to make good on these goals that we put in place. The fact that you're not really talking about reclaiming a narrative. So many are trying to reclaim the narrative around public schools. What you have done is you've claimed it. And as a community, you're holding tight to what you're trying to do together. This has been such a joy. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's always great to reflect and they'll hear what other people's thoughts are. Thank you very much.
We're back. That was amazing. I loved him. I think Dr. Justin Irish is amazing.
I really liked him too. And because he was in this larger district in Edmonds, which is just north of Seattle, about 18,000 kids or even more, and now in this very different community, just northwest, but a world away, just a world away. And he really, and he arrives during the pandemic. And right off the bat, if we're talking about the after action review, he's like, oh, these changes are going to be made about the gifted and talented program and no problem. And then when kids come back in seat and parents are like, wait, what happened? And like, I talked to some people, they said that this is what we were doing. Like, oh my God. And he handled this with such grace. I just really, really enjoyed it.
Well, yeah. The after action review, when he said, well, let's pause. And I was like, oh, Peter, please ask him, what the hell?
I did ask, how do you pause? I think I did say something along the lines of like, well, what, like the schedules and the,
it's running.
Right.
How do you pause?
Right.
I thought that was really great. And it tied earlier to a comment he made about listening, which led to a question that actually connects to the beginning of the podcast, of the interview, where he talks about being in a small district. And he says, let's see. And what's unique about small school districts is we have very few resources when it comes to depth within the organization or layers within the organization. I thought that was deep. And what a great, succinct way of describing the difference between a large district and a small district. The layers of support aren't deep in the small district. Everyone in the district does a lot of everything. And so it made me wonder, in his ability to pause and to go looking for more information, that basically, is it easier to do that in a small district? Number one. Number two, the need to do everything in a small district is probably impacted both by the fact that you have to, and because there's no one there. And number two, you know everyone at this point. And so saying no to someone you have a relationship with is significantly harder.
Oh, and they're likely connected to someone in your district already.
Correct.
They're likely.
Correct.
Yeah.
The reason for the ability to pause is tied to being a small district, that he knows eventually, in this moment he didn't, but eventually he does know everyone and can.
On the ferry last night, I don't know what exactly happened. This woman just started yelling at these two Latino women. And I don't know, they must have said something to this woman like, man, you're crazy. And then she's like, no, you're crazy. And I'm not afraid anymore. And she goes, and I've got a Mexican daughter. And as we were walking, I was like, gosh, Elizabeth, as we were walking to the car, she goes, I wonder how your daughter feels with the way you're behaving right now. And I was like, damn it, Elizabeth, why didn't you say that to me? Like whisper that in my ear. I would have said that out loud. Anyway, so then Elizabeth said to the two women, are you okay? And I thought that was just beautiful because, and we were walking to the car and she said, do you think it was okay that I said, are you okay? I go, that was the best thing to say. That was the best thing to say.
Yes, it is. I think that woman was the woman who said, I have a Mexican daughter, white.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, she obviously been drinking because she started yelling at one of the ferry workers who was like, hey, lady, like, cool it. Like, I'm sorry the ferry is 45 minutes late. I'm just the guy who gets you on and off the ferry. I don't drive it through Puget Sound. I'm not responsible for the heart attack that may have happened on the boat. I can't tell you what other, it's a miracle that we make it across and back, every time. It's an absolute miracle. And he's like, so.
The system should have failed ages ago.
Ages ago, right? I mean, they got 2,000 people coming on, 200 cars coming on. There's always a car that stalls, and it's a boat in a major port. These huge ships bringing all these containers. It's a miracle we made it.
So funny. I love that.
When you talk about a small district, one of the things I would say is in a small district, unlike this example I just given with the boat, and the reason why I talk about the boat, as you might be driving going what was that story about? Because in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, these boats are massive and they're hard to turn around. And so let's say something had to change on that boat pretty quickly. You can't do it that quickly, but you can in a small boat or kayak, those types of things. His district is sort of like these small boats that easily can shift. Doesn't mean that it's easy in the terms of the wake is maybe not as large as a big ship trying to make it change, but there's still a ripple effect of these decisions. And sometimes they're even more profound because of the people that that when you have to eliminate a position, you can't just say it's that position. It becomes Mary, and Mary's married to Jack, and Jack's got the football team. He's the coach of the football team, and Mary's brother owns the paint shop who has been giving you a good deal on when you wanted to repaint things. And so everything is connected. And as you were talking about this and describing this, it made me think of so many superintendents. They learn these skills of being a superintendent in these small districts and the relationships and the importance of community engagement and the importance of listening and the importance of co-designing. And they typically then take that to a larger district where they have to learn systems, but they understand how to talk to their community. Not many go from a large district where they were an assistant soup and then become a soup in a much smaller district and have to really learn these skills where maybe some other habits of, a big system you bring with you. So I thought this was really interesting in that perspective.
I did too. I totally did. I also think both of our response of well, ask him how he paused were because my brain is biased by the concept of a large system. You can't pause. It's already gone. Yeah. It's gone.
And somehow either he knew it intuitively or those he got to sort of talk with as he was making this decision said, hey, you believe in these iterative processes, right? I mean, he said, you have to co-design with people.
Yeah.
You have to have iterative cycles of co-design in order to build momentum, buy-in, shared meaning, and understanding. And I thought to myself, yeah, totally. Like that's what he was doing. It was like, oh, we missed on a certain thing and I could keep moving forward and I'm doing no one any good, particularly myself as a respected leader in this community who's new to the community. I want community engagement and community buy-in. Like, well, I better probably pause and let's kind of figure out where we are.
Right.
Super valuable.
Right. I love that.
Okay.
But,
so then
what I think is so interesting about the partnerships is that he has need, right? And it's not a deep system, not a deep school system for support, but his ability to go looking for partnerships in order to support mental health to the level that the doctors, the hospital in the community are also a part of that community, a part of the school community.
That's so interesting. What I wish I had asked is, did you bring that from your large district? Because that's very typical of a large system to leverage the relationships that exist to say, these are complementary systems. We don't work in isolation. How can we do some things together? I'm curious. Right. Maybe he brought that to them, or in this case, the community was primed and ready to want to figure out better ways to coordinate and to work together. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about his after action review. I thought it was really strong, mostly because what I love about it is that it's recent. It's something that he's navigating recently. And those are always my favorite. But I do want to mention that his ability to navigate the budget, and particularly the budget cuts, because you were talking about right now, and all of the superintendents that are navigating these very budget cuts, his ability to utilize a clarity of vision in terms of impacting the classroom. He said, we will not take away from the classroom. That is number one, and any laws that are in place. And so they cut around that until now, at this particular point, it's been so clear to everyone that has worked within it, so many iterative processes, that when people complain, there are so many other people involved that they're like, nope, it's not that. It's not that. And he's down to the last of it in terms of cuts, and they're no longer programmatic. They're people because of the small system, and you can't actually talk about it because it's a person, not a program.
Yeah, or a position, because the position comes with a name now. And so I know you want to talk about the after action review, and I want to jump into that. The difference that I see as you're describing it is he is driving the vision. He's co-creating, no doubt. Superintendent, though, at some point has to be the one leading that vision work. And so he's leading that work. And so these cuts are deeply personal because this is, he has a place that he wants to go. There's a destination, and it becomes increasingly hard when you're perpetually cutting. In the after action review, he inherited a vision, right? And so this vision was, we're going to eliminate gifted and talented, and we're going to do something different. And he had to implement it, and he implemented it at like the worst time and actually he didn't even know it was sort of starting, and it was the pandemic. And so didn't even feel like he understood the ramifications of that decision until students began to return.
He's the closest, I think. He was hired in February 2020. I don't think we've interviewed multiple superintendents who've talked about the impact of the pandemic, but he might be the one that's closest to the actual shutdown, like walking in and it's shut down.
Yes. And as you noted as you'll note in the conversation, he was at the epicenter of this. I mean, I think I mentioned Seattle and New York. I mean, that's where everyone around the country is like, oh, looks like that's
happening there.
That sounds bad. I guess we'll just keep paying attention.
What I loved about this one, besides being recent, was him quickly realizing that he didn't do the very thing that he thought was important. And that is an iterative process, listening to more than one group of people, staying clear to the vision rather. And honestly, it's understandable, both coming from a bigger district perspective, as well as being like, well, I don't know anybody. These people seem great and wonderful, and that doesn't sound like a bad idea. I'm all for trying to make it so that more kids have access to higher level thinking and higher level coursework. Let's do it.
Yeah,
that's great.
I'm all for opportunity. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. And that's great. It reminds me of the It's like the person who tells you, who sets you up for the joke prior to you. As you walk in, you don't know anybody. And they're like, oh, you know what you should do? You should. Before you're like, okay, yeah, they told me. Yeah, I'm going to.
Come on over. It's a costume party.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's interesting because he recognized where he had a misstep. He also he gave himself permission to not feel too bad about it, which I think was good because he was new and he did sort of ask somebody who said, yeah, this is what we're doing. And yeah, he probably should have expanded that net a bit more to say like, is this what we're doing? Because it sounds like that's a big deal. And so, but when you're a new superintendent, like you trust pretty quickly. Sort of his end comments were, hey, we got to stop listening to what others are telling us. I think he said like what the news is telling us. And we got to look at it from a local level. What does this really mean for us locally? What does it mean for the students in our school district locally? And I mean, even with the word equity, right? What does that mean for us? And I thought that was pretty marvelous, is to say, let's take a step back and understand the national narrative. And at the same time, ask our local community, like if we're talking about equity, are kids getting what they need? Do we all believe that kids should get what they need? Then we're all for equity, aren't we?
Right.
Do we feel like kids should belong? And we call that inclusion? Okay.
Yeah.
Locally, you'll get a lot of traction.
The actual word you use doesn't matter, but the ethos, the idea that they're trying to get at. And I loved the idea of redefining some of the bigger terms. But what does that mean for Anacortes? What does that mean for us? And pulling people together to figure out what that means for us. And look at that. We agree that we should teach kids to read. Once again, it's so great. I love the simplicity of that and the energy that he put into leading the listening of multiple groups, listening to multiple groups over and over. It's great.
It's beautiful. Hey, man. Thanks for your time. I'll see you next week.
Great to see you again. I'll see you next week.
You've been listening. Sorry, I kind of got excited there tonight. You've been listening. That's a little bit too low. You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, a Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.
Bye, Peter.
See you, JV. Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.